Captain Jake Morrison had survived 3 alien wars, 2 diplomatic disasters, and 1 unfortunate incident involving fermented Zenthari fruit juice. But nothing in his military career had prepared him for the moment when his universal translator glitched. He accidentally called the most feared warrior princess in the galaxy gorgeous, and she responded by blushing purple and demanding he repeat it. What started as humanity's most embarrassing first contact was about to become the most dangerous love story in the universe. Because when humans fall in love, they don't just break hearts, they break empires, rewrite laws of physics, and somehow turn the galaxy's most terrifying predator species into lovesick poets. This is the story of how one human's clumsy compliment accidentally sparked an interstellar incident that would either unite 2 species forever or start the biggest war the galaxy had ever seen. And it all began with Jake Morrison's complete inability to keep his mouth shut around beautiful women even when they had claws that could slice through titanium and a reputation for collecting enemy skulls as trophies. The universe was about to learn what humans were really capable of when they fought for love instead of survival. And, honestly, everyone should have been more afraid of that. Jake Morrison's day started badly and got progressively worse with each passing hour. The coffee synthesizer had malfunctioned during the night shift, producing something that tasted like burnt rubber mixed with regret. His uniform had somehow acquired a new stain despite spending the night hanging in his quarters, and the universal translator clipped to his collar had been making suspicious clicking noises since he'd put it on. Murphy's Law in full effect, he muttered to himself as he walked through the corridors of Earth's newest diplomatic vessel, the UES Harmony. The name felt like cosmic irony given that they were heading toward what would probably be another tense first contact situation. The Kavari Empire had finally agreed to meet with human representatives after 6 months of long-distance negotiations. Everything Jake had read about them suggested they were a warrior species with strict honor codes and an unfortunate tendency to challenge other races to single combat as a form of greeting. The diplomatic team had spent weeks drilling proper protocols, studying Kavari customs, and preparing for every possible scenario. What they hadn't prepared for was Jake's translator deciding to develop a personality disorder at the worst possible moment. The docking bay hummed with activity as the final preparations were made. Ambassador Chen ran through her notes one more time, her fingers trembling slightly with nerves. The security team checked their weapons for the 100th time, even though they'd been ordered to keep them holstered unless absolutely necessary. Everyone understood the stakes. This meeting could determine whether humanity would gain a powerful ally or make a dangerous enemy. Remember, the Kavari value directness and strength, Ambassador Chen addressed the team. Don't show weakness, but don't be overly aggressive. Their princess, Zarahai, is reportedly their finest warrior and will likely be evaluating us for combat worthiness. Whatever you do, don't stare at her. Apparently, prolonged eye contact is considered either a challenge to fight or a mating display. Jake nodded along with everyone else, though he was distracted by the increasingly erratic behavior of his translator. The device was supposed to be military grade, capable of handling complex linguistic patterns and cultural nuances. Instead, it seemed to be developing a stutter and, occasionally spitting out random words in what sounded like ancient Latin. The Kavari ship approached with predatory grace, its hull gleaming black with purple accents that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. It was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were, all curves and hidden weapons, designed to inspire both admiration and fear. As it docked with their vessel, Jake felt his pulse quicken. First contact situations always carried the potential for disaster, but something about this felt different. More charged with possibility. The airlock cycled through its sequence with mechanical precision. The diplomatic team arranged themselves in the prescribed formation, with Ambassador Chen at the front end, Jake slightly to her right as military liaison. The security team maintained a respectful distance, close enough to respond to trouble but far enough away to avoid appearing threatening. The first Kavari to emerge were clearly guards, their armor sleek and form-fitting, with faces hidden behind masks that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. They moved with the fluid grace of professional killers, scanning the docking bay with the kind of attention that suggested they could identify 17 different ways to kill everyone present without breaking stride. Then, she appeared, and Jake's brain temporarily forgot how to form coherent thoughts. Princess Zarahai stood nearly 7 feet tall, her frame athletic and powerful in a way that suggested she could probably bench press a small spacecraft. Her skin was a deep purple that seemed to shimmer in the artificial lighting, marked with intricate silver tattoos that traced elegant patterns across her arms and neck. Her hair fell in elaborate braids adorned with what appeared to be small bones and metallic trinkets that chimed softly when she moved. But it was her eyes that captured Jake's attention and held it hostage. They were large and luminous, a shade of gold that seemed to burn within her fire. When she looked directly at him, he felt something electric run through his nervous system, like touching a live wire while standing in water. "Greetings, humans of Earth," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made people automatically stand straighter. "I am Princess Zarahai of the Kavari Empire, First Blade of the Royal House, Defender of the Crimson Territories, and Collector of Worthy Skulls." Ambassador Chen stepped forward with practiced diplomacy. "Your Highness, we are honored by your presence. I am Ambassador Chen, representing the United Earth Government. We come in peace, seeking mutual understanding and beneficial relations between our peoples." Princess Zarahai inclined her head regally. "Your reputation as warriors precedes you, humans. We have heard tales of your conflicts, your resilience, your refusal to surrender even when faced with impossible odds. This interests us greatly." Jake listened to the formal exchange of greetings, trying to maintain professional composure while his translator continued its electronic seizure. The device was now emitting occasional sparks, which he tried to hide by adjusting his collar. This was definitely not the time for technical difficulties. The princess began walking through the docking bay, her guards flanking her as she examined the human ship's design with obvious interest. Her movements were hypnotic, each step flowing into the next with predatory grace. When she paused to study a section of hull plating, the way she ran her fingers across the surface was almost sensual. "Your vessel shows signs of combat damage," she observed, tracing what appeared to be scoring from energy weapons. "Recent?" "About 3 months ago," Ambassador Chen replied. "We encountered some hostile forces while protecting a civilian transport. Nothing we couldn't handle." Princess Zarahai's eyes lit up with something that might have been approval. "You defended the weak against superior numbers?" "It's what we do," Jake found himself saying, his voice carrying more conviction than he'd intended. "Humans don't abandon people who need help." The princess turned those golden eyes on him, and Jake felt his pulse spike. There was something predatory in her gaze, but also curious, as if she were trying to solve a particularly interesting puzzle. "And you are?" she asked. "Captain Jake Morrison, military liaison," he managed, grateful that his voice didn't crack like a teenager's. "Captain Morrison," she repeated, his name rolling off her tongue in a way that made his stomach do interesting gymnastics. "You speak with conviction about human nature. Tell me, Captain, what drives your species to such protective behavior?" Jake opened his mouth to deliver the standard diplomatic response about human values and moral obligations. What came out instead, thanks to his malfunctioning translator, was something entirely different. "Because we're stupid enough to care more about doing what's right than doing what's smart, and, honestly, when I look at someone gorgeous like you, all my tactical thinking goes straight out the airlock anyway." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes either violence or miracles. Jake's brain took a moment to process what had actually come out of his mouth, and, when it did, he felt his face burn with embarrassment. Ambassador Chen looked like she might faint. The security team tensed, hands moving closer to weapons. Princess Zarahai stared at him for what felt like several geological ages. Her expression was unreadable, those golden eyes wide with what could have been shock, anger, or preparation for homicide. Jake found himself mentally composing his last will and testament while simultaneously trying to figure out how to apologize for what was probably the worst diplomatic blunder in human history. Then, something extraordinary happened. The princess's purple skin deepened to a rich violet, particularly around her cheeks and the bridge of her nose. It took Jake's stunned brain several seconds to realize that she was blushing. An alien warrior princess with a reputation for collecting enemy skulls was actually blushing at his accidentally delivered compliment. "Say it again, human," she said, her voice softer than before but carrying an unmistakable note of command. Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water. What? The word you used to describe me," Princess Zarahai stepped closer, her height allowing her to look down at him with an intensity that made his knees feel unreliable.
Say it again.
Jake glanced desperately at Ambassador Chen, who looked like she was trying to solve complex mathematical equations in her head. The translator on his collar chose that moment to emit another shower of sparks and die completely. Gorgeous, he said finally, the word coming out is barely more than a whisper. I called you gorgeous. The princess's blush deepened, spreading down her neck and creating fascinating patterns where it intersected with her silver tattoos. She took another step closer, close enough that Jake could smell something like cinnamon and ozone, exotic and intoxicating. In Kavari culture, she said, her voice taking on a formal tone despite the obvious emotion coloring it, when a warrior calls another gorgeous, it is considered a declaration of intent to court.
Ambassador Chen made a choking sound.
Jake felt the ground shift beneath his feet, though that might have been his legs giving up entirely. That wasn't, my translator malfunctioned, he stammered, pointing at the now silent device.
Princess Zarahai tilted her head, studying him with renewed interest. So you did not intend to court me?
The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Jake looked into those burning golden eyes and felt something fundamental shift in his chest.
Maybe it was the adrenaline from surviving what should have been a diplomatic catastrophe.
Maybe it was the way she was looking at him, as if he were the most interesting thing in the universe. Maybe it was just that she really was gorgeous, and his malfunctioning brain had simply stated the obvious truth. I don't know anything about Kavari courtship, he said honestly. I don't know your customs or your expectations or what happens next. But I do know that you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, and if that means I accidentally proposed or challenged you to combat or sign up for some alien marriage ritual, then I guess I'll figure it out as I go.
The princess stared at him for another long moment, then threw back her head and laughed.
It was a rich, musical sound that seemed to echo through the docking bay like wind chimes in a storm. When she looked at him again, there was something new in her expression, something warm and dangerous and full of promise. Captain Jake Morrison, she said, I believe this meeting will be far more interesting than either of our governments anticipated.
Ambassador Chen stepped forward, clearly trying to salvage what remained of diplomatic protocol.
Your Highness, I believe there may have been some confusion due to technical difficulties. Perhaps we could. There was no confusion, Ambassador, Princess Zarahai interrupted, though her tone remained respectful. Your Captain Morrison has issued a traditional challenge of courtship, and I have accepted it. According to Kavari law, this creates certain obligations.
Jake felt the universe tilt sideways. Obligations?
For the next 7 cycles of our moon, you will be considered my suitor, she explained, her eyes never leaving his face. During this time, you must prove yourself worthy through trials of strength, intelligence, and compatibility. If you succeed, I may choose to accept you as my mate.
If you fail, I die horribly?
Jake guessed. Princess Zarahai smiled, revealing teeth that were definitely sharper than standard human issue.
Nothing so dramatic.
You simply return to your people, and we pretend this conversation never happened.
And if I don't participate at all?
Then, you dishonor both yourself and me, and I am required to challenge you to single combat to restore my reputation. Her smile widened. And then, you die horribly. Jake looked around the docking bay at the faces staring back at him.
Ambassador Chen appeared to be praying to several different deities simultaneously. The security team looked like they couldn't decide whether to be terrified or impressed.
The Kavari guards seemed amused by the entire situation.
Well, Jake said finally, I guess I'm going courting.
Princess Zarahai's laugh echoed through the bay again, rich with delight and anticipation.
Yes, Captain Morrison, I believe you are.
And I think both our peoples are about to learn some very interesting things about human determination. As she walked away, her guards falling into formation around her, Jake caught her glance back over her shoulder. The look she gave him was full of challenge and promise, and something else that made his pulse race all over again.
Ambassador Chen appeared at his elbow, her face pale with shock. Morrison, do you have any idea what you've just done?
Jake watched Princess Zarahai disappear into her ship, her figure graceful and dangerous and absolutely captivating.
Started an interstellar incident, he suggested. Worse, Chen replied grimly. You've fallen in love with the most dangerous woman in the galaxy. Jake considered this assessment and realized she was probably right. He'd accidentally committed himself to courting an alien warrior princess who collected skulls as trophies and could probably kill him with her pinky finger. It should have been terrifying. Instead, he found himself grinning like an idiot and already planning how to survive whatever trials she had in mind for him. Because if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was doing impossible things for the people they cared about. And, despite having known her for less than an hour, Jake Morrison was already discovering just how far he'd be willing to go for those burning golden eyes and that musical laugh. The universe was about to learn what happened when a human decided to fight for love instead of survival. Jake just hoped everyone would survive the lesson. 3 days later, Jake Morrison found himself standing in what the Kavari called an honor circle, surrounded by several hundred alien spectators who had apparently shown up to watch him either succeed spectacularly or die trying. The arena was carved from some kind of crystalline rock that seemed to glow with internal light, creating patterns that shifted and changed as the crowd moved around the elevated viewing platforms. This is insane, muttered Dr. Sarah Kim, the team's xenobiologist, as she checked Jake's vital signs one final time. Your heart rate is already elevated, your stress hormones are through the roof, and you're about to engage in ritualized combat with a species that considers dismemberment a form of artistic expression. Thanks for the pep talk, Doc, Jake replied, adjusting the lightweight armor the Kavari had provided. It fit surprisingly well, though it felt strange compared to his familiar military gear. The material seemed to respond to his movements, shifting and adapting like a second skin. Any last-minute medical advice? Don't die, she said flatly. Beyond that, I'm working with limited data. Kavari physiology is still mostly guesswork on our part. Ambassador Chen approached from across the preparation area, her face carrying the expression of someone who had spent the last 72 hours in intense negotiations. The good news is that Princess Zarahai has agreed to modify trial conditions that account for human physical limitations. The bad news is that she's still expecting you to demonstrate combat prowess against her personal guard. Jake nodded, trying to project more confidence than he felt. Since the initial encounter, he'd been given a crash course in Kavari culture and courtship rituals that had left his head spinning. Apparently, their society placed enormous emphasis on personal strength, tactical intelligence, and what they called spirit fire, a concept that didn't translate well but seemed to involve the ability to inspire others through sheer force of personality. The courtship trials were designed to test all three qualities. Success would mean acceptance into Kavari society as a worthy mate for their princess. Failure would mean, well, the Kavari were surprisingly vague about the consequences of failure, which Jake found more ominous than specific threats would have been. Has anyone actually asked Princess Zarahai what she thinks about all this? Jake asked. I mean, beyond the formal obligations? Because accidentally invoking ancient courtship laws is one thing, but I'd rather not force anyone into something they don't actually want. Ambassador Chen's expression softened slightly. Actually, that's part of why these negotiations took so long. She could have invoked several different protocols to void the courtship challenge, including claiming cultural incompatibility or insufficient warrior status on your part. She chose not to. Meaning? Meaning she's genuinely interested in seeing what you're capable of, Dr. Kim said with a knowing smile. From what our cultural analysts can determine, Princess Zarahai has turned down dozens of suitors from various species over the years. The fact that she's allowing these trials to proceed suggests you've made quite an impression. Jake felt a flutter of something that might have been hope mixed with terror. No pressure then, dot. A resonant chime echoed through the arena, signaling the beginning of the ceremonies. Jake walked toward the center of the honor circle, very aware of the hundreds of eyes watching his every move. The Kavari spectators were a diverse group, ranging from what appeared to be nobility in elaborate ceremonial armor to common citizens in simpler clothing. All of them radiated the kind of contained lethality that suggested regular combat training was a cultural norm. Princess Zarahai emerged from the opposite side of the arena, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. She wore ceremonial battle gear that managed to be both functional and stunning, deep purple metals that seemed to flow like liquid over her powerful frame. Her hair was bound in an elaborate arrangement that incorporated what looked like small weapons as decorative elements. When she moved, she created a sound like wind chimes made of razor blades. "Captain Morrison," she called out, her voice carrying easily across the space. "Are you prepared to demonstrate your worthiness as a potential mate for a daughter of the Kavari Empire?" Jake straightened to his full height, trying to channel every lesson he'd ever learned about projecting confidence under pressure. "I am, Your Highness. Though I should probably mention that human courtship rituals usually involve dinner and, maybe a movie, not gladiatorial combat." The princess's laugh carried a note of genuine delight. "Your species' customs sound remarkably peaceful, Captain. How do you determine if a potential mate is capable of protecting you in times of danger?" "We mostly hope it never comes up," Jake admitted. "But, when it does, we figure it out together." Something flickered across Princess Zarahai's expression, too quick to interpret but carrying emotional weight. "An interesting philosophy. We shall see how it serves you today." She gestured, and 3 Kavari warriors stepped into the circle. Jake recognized them as members of her personal guard from the initial meeting. Each stood nearly as tall as the princess herself, their armor bearing the kinds of battle scars that suggested extensive combat experience. "The first trial is strength," Princess Zarahai announced. "Not merely physical power, but the ability to overcome challenges through determination and tactical thinking. You must defeat my guards in single combat, but you may choose your own methods and conditions for each engagement." Jake studied his opponents, noting the way they moved, the positioning of their weapons, the subtle tells that marked experienced fighters. In a straight physical confrontation, he was outmatched. The Kavari were simply built for combat in ways humans weren't. But they'd given him the option to choose conditions, which suggested they expected him to find creative solutions. "I choose surprise for the first fight," Jake announced. "Traditional human boxing rules, no weapons, 3-minute rounds until someone goes down or yields." The first guard stepped forward, removing his armor to reveal a physique that looked like it had been carved from purple granite. Jake did the same, feeling distinctly outclassed but hoping his strategy would work. The moment the match began, the guard came at him with overwhelming aggression, exactly as Jake had expected. Kavari combat doctrine seemed to emphasize decisive action and overwhelming force. What they probably didn't expect was for him to immediately retreat, using his smaller size and human agility to stay just out of range. For 2.5 minutes, Jake danced backward around the circle, dodging strikes that would have ended the fight instantly while landing quick, light hits that individually meant nothing. The guard grew increasingly frustrated, his attacks becoming wilder as he tried to pin down his elusive opponent. Then, 30 seconds before the round ended, Jake changed tactics completely. Instead of retreating from the next charge, he dropped low and drove forward, using the guard's momentum against him in a wrestling takedown that sent them both crashing to the crystal floor. The guard was stronger, but Jake had experience grappling with opponents who outweighed him. He managed to secure a chokehold just as the time expired, forcing a yield. The crowd's reaction was mixed curiosity and approval. They'd apparently expected human combat styles to be more direct. "Clever," Princess Zarahai observed. "You used our expectations against us. What conditions do you choose for the second trial?" Jake faced the second guard, noting that this one looked more cautious after watching the first fight. "Weapons combat, but with limited space. We fight on that platform." He pointed to a raised circle barely 10 feet across. This time, Jake chose a simple staff while his opponent selected what appeared to be a combination spear and energy weapon. On the restricted platform, the guard's reach advantage became a liability, the long weapon awkward to maneuver in tight quarters. Jake managed to close distance quickly, turning the fight into a wrestling match with wooden sticks that heavily favored his lower center of gravity. The second yield came after a series of moves that would have looked at home in a martial arts demonstration, Jake using leverage and positioning to literally twist the weapon out of his opponent's hands before pointing it at his throat. The crowd's reaction was more enthusiastic this time. Apparently, they appreciated tactical thinking even when it came from a species they considered physically inferior. "2 victories through intelligence rather than brute force," the princess noted, and Jake caught what might have been pride in her voice. how will you face the third trial? The final guard was clearly their best fighter, moving with a fluid grace that suggested decades of training. He watched Jake with calculating eyes, having learned from his companion's defeats. For the third trial, Jake said, I choose cooperation. Princess Zarahai tilted her head. Explain. Humans believe that the strongest partnerships come from mutual respect and shared challenges. I challenge your guard to a contest where we work together against a common obstacle, rather than fighting each other. The arena fell silent. This was clearly not a traditional option, and Jake could see the princess conferring with what appeared to be cultural advisors. This is unusual, she said finally. But not forbidden. What challenge do you propose? Jake pointed to the arena's central spire, a crystalline tower that rose nearly 50 feet above the fighting circle. We race to retrieve that banner at the top, but we have to get there together. First one to abandon their partner loses, regardless of who reaches the goal first. The final guard studied the tower, then looked at Jake with something approaching respect. You propose to climb with me rather than against me? I propose we find out what we can accomplish together, Jake replied. What followed was 10 minutes of problem-solving, teamwork, and mutual assistance that had the crowd cheering despite themselves. The tower's surface was designed to be challenging, requiring cooperation to navigate safely. Jake's human flexibility complemented the guard's raw strength perfectly. When the guard's weight became a liability on a narrow ledge, Jake found alternate routes. When Jake's endurance flagged near the top, the guard literally carried him the final distance. They retrieved the banner together and rappelled down as a team, both grinning despite the cultural barriers between them. The crowd's reaction was unlike anything Jake had heard before. They weren't just cheering, they were celebrating, as if they'd witnessed something remarkable and unexpected. Princess Zarahai approached as Jake and her guard touched ground. Captain Morrison, in 3 centuries of recorded trials, no suitor has ever chosen cooperation over competition. Why? Jake looked at the guard who'd become his partner, then back at the princess. Because the strongest person I know once told me that real strength isn't about what you can do alone. It's about what you can inspire others to do with you. And who told you this wisdom? Jake smiled. My grandmother. She was 5 feet tall and about 90 pounds soaking wet, but she survived the siege of New Geneva by organizing a civilian resistance that held off an entire assault fleet for 3 weeks. She used to say that anyone could punch above their weight class, but it took real strength to lift others up to fight beside you. Princess Zarahai was quiet for a long moment, her golden eyes searching his face. Your grandmother sounds like a formidable warrior. She'd have liked you, Jake said honestly. She always said the most dangerous people were the ones smart enough to know when not to fight. The princess's expression shifted, becoming softer and more personal despite the public setting. The first trial was strength, and you have passed. Tomorrow we test intelligence with challenges of strategy and problem solving. And then? The final trial is spirit fire. The ability to inspire others, to lead when leadership is needed, to stand firm when others would yield. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the complex patterns in her golden eyes. Tell me, Captain Morrison, why do you wish to court me? Jake felt the weight of her attention, the expectation of the crowd, the importance of his answer to everything that would follow. Honestly? I don't know if I do want to court you, not in the traditional sense. I know I want to understand you. I want to learn what makes you laugh, what challenges you, what you dream about when no one's watching. I want to know if this thing I feel when I look at you is real or just the adrenaline from surviving the impossible. He paused, very aware that he was essentially baring his soul in front of several hundred strangers. I want to find out if 2 people from completely different worlds can build something together that's stronger than what either of them could create alone. And if that's not what courtship means to your people, then maybe we need to invent new words for what this is. Princess Zarahai stared at him for what felt like an eternity, her expression cycling through surprise, consideration, and something that might have been wonder. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft enough that only he could hear. Captain Morrison, you may be the most dangerous human I have ever encountered. Dangerous how? Her smile was answer enough. Tomorrow, we test your mind. But, I suspect you have already passed the most important trial of all. As the crowd began to disperse and the formal ceremonies concluded, Jake found himself wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Princess Zarahai was brilliant, powerful, and utterly captivating in ways he was still trying to understand. The trials were revealing as much about her as they were testing him, and what he was learning suggested that underneath all the ceremony and tradition was someone worth fighting for. The question was whether he'd survive long enough to find out if she felt the same way about him. Dr. Kim appeared at his elbow as they walked back toward the preparation area. How are you feeling? Jake watched Princess Zarahai walking ahead of them, surrounded by her advisors but glancing back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Like I'm in way over my head and loving every minute of it. That, Dr. Kim said with a grin, sounds like a very human response to falling in love. Jake considered this assessment and realized she was probably right. He'd survived the first trial, but the hardest challenges were still ahead. And, somehow, that prospect filled him with anticipation rather than dread. Whatever happened next, it was going to be interesting. The intelligence trials had been a revelation. Jake had spent 2 days solving complex strategic puzzles, navigating elaborate scenarios that tested everything from tactical planning to resource management under pressure. What surprised him wasn't that he'd passed. Humans were decent problem solvers when they put their minds to it, but how much he'd enjoyed working alongside Princess Zarahai as she evaluated his responses. She was brilliant in ways that made his head spin. Her mind operated like a precision instrument, cutting through complexity to find elegant solutions that often hadn't occurred to him. But, more than that, she seemed to genuinely enjoy the mental sparring, challenging his assumptions and pushing his reasoning to its limits with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely found intellectual equals. Now, standing in what the Kavari called the heart chamber, Jake faced the final trial with a mixture of anticipation and terror. This wasn't an arena or a puzzle room, but something that felt almost sacred. The walls were covered in crystalline formations that pulsed with soft light, creating patterns that seemed to respond to the emotions of people within the space. The trial of spirit fire, Princess Zarahai explained, her voice taking on a formal tone despite their growing familiarity, is the most important and the most dangerous. It tests not what you can do, but who you are at your core. Jake nodded, trying to project more confidence than he felt. What exactly does that involve? You will be connected to the heart crystal. She gestured toward a massive formation at the center of the chamber that pulsed with deep purple light. It will show us your true nature, your deepest motivations, your capacity for leadership and inspiration. But, be warned, the crystal shows truth without mercy. Many suitors have fled rather than face what it reveals. Jake studied the imposing crystal formation, noting the way it seemed to hum with energy that he could feel in his bones. And, if I don't like what it shows? Princess Zarahai's expression became serious, almost gentle. Then, you will know something about yourself that you did not know before. Growth, even painful growth, is never a wasted experience. Jake took a deep breath and approached the crystal. How does this work exactly? Place your hands on the surface and open your mind, she instructed. Do not try to control what it shows. Do not try to present yourself as anything other than what you are. The crystal responds to authenticity above all else. As Jake placed his palms against the warm surface of the heart crystal, he felt a strange tingling sensation spread up his arms. The chamber around him seemed to fade, replaced by something that felt both internal and external at the same time. Images began to flow through his consciousness, memories and emotions given form and substance. He saw himself as a child, standing up to bullies twice his size because they were picking on someone smaller. The fear he'd felt was vivid and real, but so was the determination that had driven him forward despite it. He saw himself in military training, struggling with physical challenges that came easily to others but refusing to quit. His drill instructor's words echoed through the vision, "Morrison, you're not the biggest or the strongest, but you're too stubborn to know when you're beaten. That's going to serve you well someday." The crystal showed him moments of leadership, times when he'd stepped forward not because he was the most qualified but because someone needed to take responsibility. It showed him failures too, mistakes that had cost him dearly but taught him valuable lessons about humility and learning from others. But, then, the vision shifted to something more recent and more personal. He saw himself in the docking bay 3 days ago, watching Princess Zarahai emerge from her ship. The crystal revealed the exact moment when attraction had become something deeper, when he'd looked at her and felt not just desire but recognition, as if some part of him had been waiting his entire life to meet someone who challenged him so completely. The images became more complex, showing possible futures that branched out like a vast tree. In some, he and the princess stood together against threats that endangered both their peoples, their combined strengths creating solutions that neither could achieve alone. In others, he saw himself learning to understand Kavari culture while teaching her about human customs, building bridges between worlds through their relationship. But the crystal also showed harder truths. It revealed his deepest fears about inadequacy, his worry that he was just an ordinary human trying to reach beyond his capabilities. It showed him the loneliness he'd carried for years, the sense that he'd never found someone who truly understood him. Most painfully, it showed him moments when his determination had bordered on recklessness, when his refusal to give up had put others at risk. He saw faces of people he'd failed to save, decisions that had haunted him for years. Through it all, Princess Zarahai watched, her expression unreadable as the crystal projected his innermost self for examination. Then, something unexpected happened. The crystal began showing her memories as well. Jake saw her as a young Kavari, struggling to prove herself worthy of her royal heritage while dealing with the isolation that came from being stronger and smarter than most of her peers. He saw her first combat victories and the hollow feeling that followed when she realized that defeating others didn't fill the emptiness inside her. He saw her rejecting suitor after suitor, not because they weren't strong enough, but because they wanted to possess her rather than partner with her. He felt her loneliness, deeper and more profound than his own, the burden of being revered but not truly known. Most surprisingly, he saw the moment 3 days ago from her perspective. When he'd accidentally called her gorgeous, she hadn't just blushed from surprise. She'd felt something she'd never experienced before, the sensation of being seen as a person rather than a prize to be won or a weapon to be wielded. The crystal showed him her growing fascination as she'd watched him navigate the trials. Not because he'd won through superior strength, but because he'd approached each challenge as an opportunity to understand rather than to dominate. It revealed her amazement when he'd chosen cooperation over competition, proving that his strength came from lifting others up rather than pushing them down. But, most powerfully, it showed him her hope, carefully guarded and almost hidden from herself, that maybe, finally, she'd found someone who could be her equal not through conquest but through partnership. As the visions faded and Jake became aware of his physical surroundings again, he found himself staring into Princess Zarahai's golden eyes. She looked shaken, as if the crystal had revealed more than she'd expected. "Well," she said quietly, "that was illuminating." Jake stepped back from the crystal, feeling emotionally raw but strangely cleansed. "It shows both people, doesn't it? Not just the one being tested." "Yes," she admitted. "I should have warned you." The heart crystal believes that true partnership requires mutual understanding. Jake considered what he'd learned about her, the complexity and depth that lay beneath her royal demeanor. "Zarahai," he said, using her name without the formal title for the first time, "can I ask you something?" She nodded, seeming suddenly vulnerable in a way that made his chest tight. "What do you actually want from this courtship? Not what tradition demands or what your people expect, but what you personally hope to find." She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes reflecting the pulsing light of the heart crystal. "I want what you offered in your first trial," she said finally. "Partnership. Someone who sees me as Zarahai rather than Princess Zarahai. Someone who challenges me to be better rather than simply praising what I already am." Jake felt something settle into place in his chest, like puzzle pieces finally aligning. "Then, can I make a proposal that has nothing to do with ancient courtship laws or diplomatic obligations?" Her expression became guarded. "What kind of proposal?" "The kind where I ask if you'd like to have dinner with me. Not as a trial or a test, but because I want to know what makes you laugh when you're not being a royal princess. I want to hear about your dreams and your frustrations and the things you think about when you're alone at night." Princess Zarahai's eyes widened with surprise. you're asking me on what humans call a date.
I'm asking if you want to try building something together without the pressure of ancient laws and formal obligations.
If we connect, we connect.
If we don't, then at least we'll know it was our choice. She studied his face with the intensity she'd shown during the intelligence trials.
You would abandon the courtship rituals? Even though completing them successfully would guarantee you a position of power within the Kavari Empire? Jake smiled. Zarahai, I don't want a position of power.
I want to get to know the woman who chose cooperation over competition just to see what I do. I want to understand the person who blushes when someone calls her gorgeous but could probably kill me with a soup spoon if she felt like it. Her laugh was the same musical sound that had captivated him during their first meeting, but now it carried notes of relief and genuine joy.
A soup spoon would be inefficient. I'd use a dinner fork. See? That's exactly the kind of thing I want to learn about you.
Princess Zarahai stepped closer, close enough that he could see the complex patterns of silver in her golden eyes.
Jake Morrison, you realize that if we pursue this without the formal structure of courtship trials, there are no guarantees? No legal protections, no diplomatic immunity if things go wrong?
The best things in life don't come with guarantees, Jake replied.
They come with the willingness to risk everything for the possibility of something extraordinary.
She reached out and took his hands in hers, her purple skin warm and slightly textured in a way that was fascinating rather than strange. Then, yes, Captain Morrison, I would very much like to have dinner with you. The sound that erupted from the heart chamber's observation area made them both look up in surprise. They'd been so focused on each other that they'd forgotten about the formal witnesses required for the trial. Now they saw Ambassador Chen, Dr. Kim, several Kavari nobles, and what appeared to be half the diplomatic corps from both species cheering from the viewing platforms.
Did we just accidentally create another interstellar incident? Jake asked.
Princess Zarahai grinned, and the expression transformed her face from regally beautiful to breathtakingly radiant.
Almost certainly. The first couple to court outside traditional structures, the first human to pass all 3 trials, and the first princess to voluntarily abandon formal protocols for personal preference? Will be studied by xenosociologists for decades. Jake considered this prospect and found he didn't mind it at all. As long as they let us finish our first date before they start taking notes.
Oh, they're definitely taking notes already, she said, gesturing toward Dr. Kim, who was indeed frantically scribbling observations while Ambassador Chen spoke rapidly into her communicator.
But I believe we can manage to maintain some privacy.
As they walked toward the chamber's exit, Jake felt something that had been tight in his chest for years finally relax. He'd found someone who challenged him intellectually, matched his determination, and somehow saw something worth treasuring in his very human combination of stubbornness and compassion. So, he said as they emerged into the corridor that would lead back to the diplomatic quarters, for our first official date, any preferences?
I should mention that human cuisine is probably going to be a disappointment after whatever amazing food your people eat.
Zarahai squeezed his hand gently. Actually, I'm curious about this pizza that your cultural files mention repeatedly. It seems to hold significant meaning in human bonding rituals. Jake laughed, delighted by her practical approach to cultural exchange.
Pizza it is.
Fair warning though, once you understand why humans are obsessed with cheese and bread combinations, there's no going back. I'll consider that a challenge, she replied, and the way she said it made him suspect that pizza wasn't the only thing she was planning to investigate thoroughly. 6 hours later, Jake found himself in the Harmony's main galley, watching an alien warrior princess attempt to navigate the complex social protocols of sharing a pizza with someone she was getting to know. It should have been absurd. Instead, it was perfect. So when you say extra pepperoni, Zarahai asked seriously, examining a slice with the same intensity she'd shown during the strategy trials, this refers to the quantity of preserved meat rather than the level of spice intensity?
Exactly.
Though if you want spice intensity, we can definitely arrange that, Jake replied, trying not to laugh at her methodical approach to human food.
The important thing is that pizza is meant to be messy. It's not a formal dining experience.
She took a careful bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then, her eyes widened with what appeared to be revelation.
This is surprisingly complex. The combination of textures and flavors creates a synergy that's greater than the individual components. Welcome to humanity's greatest culinary achievement, Jake said with mock solemnity. We've been perfecting the art of cheese bread optimization for centuries. Zarahai smiled, and Jake realized that this was the first time he'd seen her genuinely relaxed since they'd met. Away from the formality of trials and diplomatic protocols, she was even more captivating, brilliant and curious and surprisingly funny in her observations about human customs. Tell me about your grandmother, she said suddenly. The one who defended New Geneva. She sounds like someone I would have enjoyed meeting. Jake settled back in his chair, comfortable in a way he hadn't expected to be while sharing a meal with an alien princess in the middle of space. She would have loved you. Grandma Elena had a thing for people who could think strategically under pressure. As he began to share stories about the woman who'd shaped his understanding of real strength, Jake realized that somewhere between the accidental compliment and the voluntary abandonment of ancient courtship rituals, he'd stopped thinking about this as a diplomatic mission or an interstellar adventure. This was just Jake and Zarahai sharing pizza and stories and the beginning of something that didn't have a name in either of their languages yet. But, whatever it was, it felt like the start of exactly the kind of partnership he'd always hoped to find: challenging, supportive, and strong enough to handle whatever the universe might throw at them next. And if the rest of the galaxy had to adjust their expectations about human-Kavari relations because two people had decided to write their own rules about love and partnership, well, that seemed like a very human thing to do. 3 months later, when Jake and Zarahai announced their engagement at a ceremony that blended human and Kavari traditions in ways that made diplomats from both species simultaneously excited and terrified, Ambassador Chen would note in her official report that sometimes the most successful diplomatic missions were the ones that threw the mission parameters out the airlock and improvised something better. But, that night, eating pizza in a starship's galley and falling in love with someone from another world, Jake Morrison was just a human who'd found his perfect match and was looking forward to spending the rest of his life figuring out what impossible things they could accomplish together. The universe had learned what happened when humans fought for love instead of survival. The answer, it turned out, was that they created something stronger than either of their species had ever imagined possible.